Hello, everybody. I'm really so pleased to be sharing my screen today with Kristen Eno and Richard Lewis. They're going to be talking about the Living by Wonder, the Imaginative World of Childhood, which comes from a title of one of Richard's wonderful books. Kristen Eno has worked with young children in New York City schools for 20 years, most recently as studio teacher at Beginnings Nursery School. She was community arts educator at the Manny Cantor Center for 3 years, and prior to that, she co-founded and taught the drop-in play workshop, Find and Seek. Through Digital Story Workshop and Little Creatures Films, Kristen developed a unique practice of video documentation of young children's imaginative play and original stories. She has produced over 20 short films with children, including Spirit Ship, a mystery shot on location in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Kristen's work is featured in Susan Aksjon's book, Squandering America's Future, Why Early Childhood Education Policy Matters for Equality, Our Economy, and Our Children, a 2015 book. And her photos are featured in my book, Choice Time. And I must say that Kristen's pictures really stand out for me because she knows children, and they were just so successful because she was really looking closely at the inquiry of children, what children were curious about. And I thought I'd share these, and you can't see them as well, but she just really knows children, and she really knew what she was looking for. Kristen studied art education at Dartmouth College, where she got her BA, and Columbia Teachers College, where she got her Master's of Education. She and her husband, Sean, live in Brooklyn and have 2 daughters. Kristen has produced a wonderful series of videos that are studio provocations for the students and teachers at Beginnings. And you'll find a link to one of them on this page that you could read. Richard Lewis is a teacher and writer, the founder and director of the Touchstone Center for Children in New York City. It was begun in 1969. The center has worked with children and teachers in a variety of school settings and projects that bring together the arts and the imaginative and poetic process, with particular emphasis on the relationship of the natural world and the life of the imagination. His most recent publications include What If? A Poem of Our Imagining, they're right here, which I've been sharing with teachers, Poem of Imagining, a Poem of Our Imagining, Enchantments and the Earth, We Are Rivers, and Plays Said the Earth to the Sky, along with his essays and reflections collected in Taking Flight, Standing Still, Living by Wonder, and When Thought is Young. Vivian Gusson-Paley wrote in a review of Richard's book, Taking Flight, Standing Still, quote, "Poets and children are natural companions. The child dreams up worlds apart without instruction, and the poet has never outgrown these childhood necessities. When Richard Lewis comes to visit, the classroom suddenly opens up to a sky filled with celestial beings, and butterflies arrive to carry us to distant planets. It is but a short distance from the poet's imagery to a child's sense of joy and sadness, and we readers take flight with the children as they find the words that express their feelings. Once again, Mr. Lewis shows us the hidden world of childhood and makes us want to change our own classrooms into magical places." So welcome, Kristen, and welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
I thought I'd start by just asking a simple question, all right? And maybe you could think about that. because this is wonder, the language of the inner world. What is wonder? What is it when you think of it?
Well, I don't know who's going first, but I'll
Just go to it, Richard.
Go, Richard.
um, uh, I think wonder is one of those wonderful words that cannot be fully explained. And that's part of its power, which is that it's a quality of thought or quality of feeling that we don't fully understand. I don't think there's a place within the human brain that you can actually locate wonder as an actual physical presence, but there it is. And I think a very simple example of it was when I was taking a walk this morning. I was near some people right in front of me who suddenly stopped and said, "Oh, it's snowing," just like that. And I stopped as well because I'm an advocate of snow and snow flurries. And I thought about what we asked, what question we're asking now. And I thought, well, what was that moment where we stood still just for a moment, feeling or watching the snow falling? Could that be called wonder? And my suspicions are yes, it's definitely a deep and very integral part of our sense of surprise, our sense of the world coming alive. And when snowflakes begin to fall, for any age, there is a certain sense that the world is changing in front of our eyes, and we're changing with it. And it's that quality of ourselves and what's happening around us that we suddenly feel a kind of unity, a kind of sense of the world in a very different place than it's in terms of its separateness. With children, of course, that moment in which they stand still, in which they suddenly realize that something about themselves or something about the world is fused into their world, I would say that is the beginning of a sense of wonder. And the discussion, obviously, that follows from that is how do we take that sense of wonder? How do we take that experience of wonder and utilize it so that it's not just a quality of feeling or a quality of thought that happens occasionally, but actually is part and parcel of the nature of childhood itself. It is a learning aspect of how we learn. And without it, there is really no substantial learning. I would say it's fusing with the nature of play, it's fusing with the nature of the imagination. It's all those qualities kind of intermixed. But if we avoid those qualities, if we say that they're only something you do at recess or at playtime, then we lose the nature of really how to take the essential sense of wonder and use it as a very profound force of wanting to know, wanting to explore, wanting to become a part of something larger than ourselves, perhaps. But so that's a very, I would say, primary beginning of thinking about it. But that moment in which one observes, one senses something is happening in the sky, those snowflakes that are falling, as intermittent as they might be, it's almost as if, oh my heavens, look at what it's doing. It's snowing. And I don't know if I only speak for myself. I'm a lover of those moments, but I think it's probably almost indigenous to childhood to be startled. And that sense of being startled is the beginning of wonder, I would suspect.
Mm.
I have to follow up and say that my 11-year-old was sitting not far from me in our home studio, office, school, everything in one apartment, as we're all familiar with these days. And she saw the snow. Well, first I saw the snow, and the window's pretty close to both of us where we were sitting. And I kind of whispered it, "Is it snowing?" Like in disbelief. And she turned, but I couldn't see her. I have a bookshelf in between us, but I couldn't see her. But I could feel that she was turning to check it out. And then all of a sudden I heard a yell. And she's 11 and she just screamed it. it's snowing. And so I kind of, it's just, that was a reminder that she's still a child. She's 11. So she's making her way up to this thing called adulthood, but she's not there yet, thank God. And the wonder is something deeper than what we know, or else that immediacy of the magic is still more immediate for her than it was for me. And that's just a fact of, you know, us growing up as humans. Like, what does it mean to be a child, and what does it mean to be more attuned to wonder?
Mm-hmm.
Children they're closer to it. And I think as educators, we all see that. We have some knowledge, we grasp that in some way, which pulls us into wanting to work with children, right? I mean, they're closer to it, and that's a window for us to start to do our work, to listen to them, right? And so I guess that's how I see wonder, is really through their eyes. That's, you know, it's often the bridge, or, you know, if we put out a provocation, like Renee, you mentioned the provocation videos. I mean, I've thought about that. Well, how do I present something that can spark that wonder? And that's sometimes really, really hard question, because I can't make it snow, you know? And so I guess that's why for us, just to reference one of your other discussions that you had, this beautiful conversation with Layla and Kathy, where the children were looking at the sky, and so much can come from that. So again, I guess wonder is just, it's so many things. But I also wanted to say, that it's great to be led in this conversation by both of you, who I consider mentors, both of you, Renee and Richard. And so what you said, Richard, was so well said, how you started out answering Renee's question. And I just have to reference the many, many times that I've been to your workshops and have learned about listening to children through your work, Richard. So thank you. And also, what an honor it is for me to be talking to you, Renee, since you obviously listen to children through your work in the classroom and with teachers. So this is really a blessing to me to be here today. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kristen. That's beautiful. Well, I'd love to kind of pick up on a couple of words you used. The first one was magic. And kind of think about what the nature of magic is. Just maybe going back to the idea of those few snowflakes, flurries they were, as they fell from the sky. What do you think makes them magical? What's magical about it?
Well, Richard, I just remember, I'm not totally answering your question, but somehow I am. I remember going to a workshop that you gave at, I think, Kristen, maybe you were there or you organized it, at the Brooklyn Ethical Culture. It was down in the basement at Brooklyn Ethical Culture a few years ago. And you had us do something where we caught something with our hands, but there was nothing there. But you talked us through this. We were catching something and feeling it and looking at it. And I may not be describing it exactly correctly, but it was like you created something there. And when Kristen was talking about how, the frustration of you can't make it snow, Richard, I think you could. I do mean it. I think that you could talk us through it in a way that we could feel, we could literally feel and see snow coming down, and so in some way you use your words and your imagination to hook onto whoever you're talking to, bring them into it, engulf them in it, and then everybody feels the snow and everybody sees it, or whatever it is that we're doing. I can't remember what it was that we were catching. It was
Yes.
something in the sky and we were catching it,
Catching. Yes. Well, see, that's another reminder for us, I think, is that as adults, we don't lose that ability to both imagine, but also feel through our imagination a very sensory world that was so apparent, obviously, in childhood.
Mm.
The senses for children are probably almost the alphabet of their knowing. It's how they begin to acknowledge the world, and so if you think of that as something that's imprinted within us as we grow older, it's not too difficult to get anybody to literally take your hand like that, or this hand, or both hands, and just take a little movement like this and let the snowflakes fall. And then you move your hands a little bit and you feel the waterness of them, you feel the crystals of them, you feel the qualities of something that was still part of this thing called childhood. So when we do this with children, it's almost as if you're speaking in a vocabulary to them that they're already so involved in, that is part of the way they acknowledge the world, is through those senses, through that playful sense of the senses. And in a way, it's not abstract. It's actually very concrete. So if I said to you, if you wanted to take that hand again and just take it and put another few snowflakes in the other hand like that, and then wipe your hand just like that and send the snowflake back up into the sky, you see it, right? You feel it. So the profound life that goes on in the mind of the child is that they don't see this as a contradiction or as something that's obtuse in any way. What they're acknowledging again is their total involvement in the process of making that thing come alive. So it's about aliveness in the deepest sense of aliveness. It's how this marvelous part of ourselves, as well as the rest of the body, knows the secret of aliveness by being alive itself, and then translates that into whatever you want to make alive, whether it's abstract or totally real. So, I could take a seashell like this, right? And I could say to myself, oh, how marvelous it would be to go inside that seashell and let the water roll over it and feel what it feels like. It doesn't take much for us to begin to start that process within ourselves, to actually have the imagery of water moving in and around the seashell and realizing, oh, we're inside the seashell. We're looking at what's going on. We're feeling what's going on. It's this amazing ability of the human mind, in this case, to take whatever it is you let it move towards, it begins to happen. So in a way, it's striking at the very nature of what life is altogether. It's that sense of beginning. How do I begin a process that I both are involved in, that I'm both creating at the same time?
Mm.
So it comes down to this inherent quality of play that children have. And the very purpose of that play, in large part, is to connect us to the nature of life itself. And to suddenly have this quality of understanding, of probing what it means to be alive on the level of perceiving, on the level of sensing, a level of incorporating all of the language of life itself that we're surrounded by, both outside and inside of us. So it's a very beautiful process in which, as adults, children still have, and then you can use that as a link to the child's world without it sounding, superficial or sounding different. It becomes a perfectly natural way of translating the nature of being alive from
Mm.
ourselves to children on that level.
That's just so beautiful. And I have to say, I'm so glad you picked up a shell and used that as an example. And I want it somehow my mind started going to clay as a material. And not only do we look to nature to provide that concrete, you know, tangible, I guess tangible is a better word, you know, object to talk about, to look at, to touch together, and you know, understand as a entry point. And in the same way, materials like clay, which I've been working with a lot in studio this week with 2-year-olds up to 5-year-olds, and clay as a material, as a it provides what is needed for the hands to bring thoughts start to develop as the child is doing this, and
Yes.
in the same way that holding a shell, but in a little different way, because they're molding the clay and they're squishing it and they're changing it, and then the ideas start to develop and the magic does start to happen. And so I guess I just want to make that connection to materials in the studio and how powerful they are to bring the wonder. Maybe, you know, we don't even have to say anything. It's, you know, sometimes that question is so important. And I love the way you phrase questions, Richard. I really do. And they're just so profound, and they can draw so much out of adults, you know, in our workshops with you, but also children, of course. And so I'm thinking a lot about, you know, how do we present materials in a way that is beautiful and is accessible to young children, so that because that really makes a difference for how they approach, and you know, how they start to how the poetry starts to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, the other way, going back to Kristen about clay and hands, that sort of gets to the very origin of, when you think in terms of the human development, human evolution on that level,
Yeah.
and how some of our earliest ancestors discovered clay and began to mold and shape through our hands, and the discovery of what the hands can do. And that the hand is kind of, if I can think of it in this way, is a kind of messenger, a link to ourselves. And it's another way, obviously, of speaking. So when the hands are working with clay, or they're drawing pictures, or even when they're writing, all of that is, again, a process of translation. And the fact that we have the ability to draw from the nature of our hands, whether it's playing an instrument or using clay, or whatever way, that the marvel of the hands being this both spoken but also silent means of bringing to life again, if you understand what I'm saying. It's a kind of a regenerating of that feeling for the process, both of life making, but also the experience of being alive. I just wanted to, while I'm thinking of that, there's a wonderful comment here by child Jenny, who was 9 years old, and she said, "As my happiness grows, the sunlight grows also. As my happiness grows, the sunlight grows also." I think, in a nutshell, what she's saying is that what is me is also that outside, in this case, the sun. And that this kind of, again, correspondence between what I'm feeling and what the sun is doing, how you bring those two together, is both a marvel of the act of imagining, but also a very instinctive sense, again, going back to children, that they don't make the separation often between what's out there and themselves, and particularly in the sense of the processes of nature itself. You know, it's all part of the same world, or I can put it that way. So clay is again another marvelous way of bringing children back to the very nature of nature itself, being the fact that you're working with clay. Clay is as old as you can get, right? It's the substance of the earth. So by
Love that.
working with it, playing with it, it's like, oh my gosh, look what I can do and make from that. So going back to wonder again, even that realization of that connection between the clay and the hands is an act of wonder too. It's that sense that I'm not separated from what's out there. I'm that. I'm myself, but I'm also all of what surrounds me.
It's making me think of so many things. Like I'm starting to think clay is just the antidote to our screens these days and these boxes that we're in, and it does worry me that we are losing the ability to work with these hands. And I do wonder sometimes when I see, when it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Sometimes I guess the best thing that we can do is just put it in front of children, put the clay there and give them the opportunity.
Yes.
We don't know what's happening in the rest of their life, but we do know that we're in a pandemic right now and that a lot of us find ourselves on screens more than
Yes.
we know that children should, be on screens.
Yes.
But here we are. And just trying to think of imaginative ways to find the wonder in a time like this,
Let me just, of course, when you say things like that, my mind begins to go into super drive, and
Yeah.
obviously the screen is a huge problem on that level because we're not next to the very person that we're talking on the level of being physically close to them. But as I'm looking at you and thinking about what you're saying, I see all these colors in the background. I see red and I see yellow. What else do I see? I see a little bit of green and blue. So one of the first things I would try to do with children, going back to using hands, is I would say, go to your screen and just take a little bit of the blue that you see here, a little bit of the red, right? And mix them up just as I'm doing like that and make them spin very quickly so they don't know what's happening, that they're just becoming a little bit of a mixture of blue and red. And then let them just sit there very quietly, just like that. And let them tell you a little bit about what it feels like to be a little blue and a little red all mixed in together. So what I'm just doing, I'm playing here a little bit, but I'm trying to figure out how to use the kind of sense of a screen that doesn't seem to have a language of its own, but yet we're absorbing that language just by looking at it. And by, again, going back to the marvel of children and their ability to make that leap, is to use what's right there in front of us and try to take what's there. By the way, as I'm saying that, I wonder how my voice goes through this machine, goes up in the air, and finds you on the other side.
Great.
You know, you're in Brooklyn, you see, and I'm in Manhattan, and our voice travels this amazing distance between Manhattan rather, and Brooklyn. So we ask these kinds of questions. Oh, by the way, if our voice is traveling, I can put my hand, going back to hands, I could actually gather my voice right from the traveling. It's not going by subway. I can travel and write and catch my voice like that, and I can do this, and I can listen to my voice all over again. So there are all kinds of ways. Yes, there you go. You can
I'm
take
listening to your voice, Richard.
You can
I
take
want to listen with this special. I have a special. This is a really, really high-tech device.
Yes.
And watch how it works. Can you all see how this is working?
There you go.
Now, this is my listening device. Where did oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah. And I can walk right down through the middle of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Oh, hello. Hello, Renee and Richard.
See, there you go. There you go. So it's the simplest of things, simplest of devices.
It is.
It doesn't take a lot of complicated machinery, so to speak, or complicated ways of thinking about these things. But for the adult, it means kind of going back to that sense of wonderment, that sense of play that is still engraved within us, and not being afraid of it,
Mhm.
allowing it to kind of suddenly improvise some way of seeing and feeling and knowing that immediately opens up for children, gives them permission, I would say, to think this way, that it's a perfectly legitimate way of thinking and of something that you don't lose as you get older, which is very important on that level.
Yeah, and you do have a gift for sort of breaking the barrier and going there to create those questions. How does my voice go up and get to you? I mean, that's a wonderful question that I haven't asked any children lately. So thank you. I want to compile more questions that make sense right now. Or that makes sense in an imaginative world, because there's so many questions swirling in our minds right now, in the world right now, that it's just really helpful to me to hear you sort of reframe the Zoom space, as it were. Thank you.
It makes me think of that it's like a poet and an artist, almost like they have gone back to their childhood to create the poetry and the art that they create. And it's what you're doing, Richard, to me, is you're thinking like a poet, or you're thinking like an artist, and using that to make a connection in some way. It makes me think of some painting that I looked at once with a group of teachers in a training thing. You might know it, a George Tooker painting of the bird watchers. And all of these people are in Central Park, all right? And you don't really see the birds, but you see the park, and they're all looking up like that. They're looking up. And you can't quite figure out what they're doing, if you don't know the title of the picture, and you have to kind of imagine why are they all looking up? What is the commonality between them? And as when you were talking before that, I was thinking of the magic of it, because just by looking at this painting, mind just goes all over the place, like what's happening here. And it just, a story comes, and you don't even need the title, because you don't need to know that they're looking at birds. Whatever you think of that they're looking at is what's happening there.
It's a wonderful example of the mind, of the imagination in this case, finding what is there by imagining what's possibly there. And the gift of that aspect of thinking, it seems to me, going back to childhood now, you begin to ask the question, why have children been given this gift to see things that are invisible on some level? And to me, that quality of thought, the kind of the way in which we deal with what's invisible, that which we cannot see immediately, but we can see it in any case by imagining it. So going back to the example you gave, the idea that the birds are not in the picture, but where are they? They're in our thoughts. They're what we can imagine of the bird flying in the sky. So that I wouldn't even call it a trick of the imagination. I would say the ability of the imagination to make links to what can't be seen is probably one of the great, I would say, great pieces of the puzzle that allows the human mind to grow. So much of what a child enters the world with is, in fact, ultimately invisible. It doesn't see everything at once. So it has to take in what it does see, and then from what it sees, it begins to see even more. And it begins to see the invisible as a possibility of exploring, of investigating, of what curiosity then becomes. And it's almost like the foundation of knowledge itself. I want to know something that I can't see at the moment, or I don't know, but I have enough of my imagining of what it could be to take the next step. So it's kind of actually a miraculous part of the human development, and one that's, I think if you explore it with children openly, just as we did with the snow coming into our hands, a simple gesture like that opens up for them a kind of confidence that you can do this kind of thinking, and it's all right. And it's nothing to be afraid of, because it, in fact, is what we do all the time. Uh, Now, the other side of the coin, I think, is going back to the invisible, how the invisible can be frightening, how the invisible can be used in dangerous ways of making people frightened, and how we have to be very careful as we think imaginatively with children, even with ourselves, is that we see the creative side of the imagination versus the destructive side, how the imagination can obviously be a means of misleading the human mind, and using it in ways that will be destructive. So it's that dual capacity that the imagination has, that if it's not something that we make children aware of, can be easily used to manipulate our minds into ways that will, in fact, in the long run, be very destructive. Another reason I would say why it's so important to have that as part of any environment that children are working in, this openness and this discussion of this inquiry into the life of what we think and how we feel and how we know, how we imagine, how we in fact wonder, all of those aspects of those questions, to keep those aspects alive as a piece of conversation. Um, so whether it begins with the hands, making something with clay, or words come, or a sensibility that uh, I can feel the sun outside of myself as I feel myself in terms of my happiness. All of those connections are very important. I sense more and more to be at the very core of the conversation that goes on between ourselves and children. So this awareness is something that is articulated, but not through the articulated. And again, a very careful line has to be drawn, not spoken in a way that we submerge it, but allow it to be kept alive as a constant process of thinking, a process of feeling and knowing on that
Wouldn't
level.
that be very important now? I mean, I just can't imagine what children are thinking now, in terms of the virus,
Yes,
and so that's where the frightening part of the imagination uh,
yes,
uh, might come in. And so it seems
absolutely.
really particularly important to give children outlets now for expressing this and for somehow talking it through. And I don't know, what would you say about that? How do you
It's
deal?
got to be spoken about openly. I mean, I think we have to. I mean, this is a biological phenomena that's happening, and we have to be honest with children that this is how life also works itself. There's dangers and things that happen biologically on that level, but it's kind of getting into the nature of the language of nature itself. And that language, has different ways of both being expressed and articulating itself. And if you could think of nature in that level, of also having an imagination, that nature is itself an act of imagining. Um, the marvel of nature, the very degree to which the intricacy and the possibility that nature creates and has created from the very start of life itself, is a profound act of knowing that we could call imagination. So we're part of that. We're part of that process of imagining, and how we balance ourselves within the larger spectrum, so to speak, of the imaginative process that's going on around us is biological process on that level, is a thought that I think has to be shared with children, and also has a lot to do with children's sense that we're intricately connected to this biological world. We're not separate from it.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, all of the work we need to do to keep this earth of ours alive, if we're going to stay alive. So it's all of that initiation, I would say, of that kind of way in which we open up the very nature of our explanation, our way of explaining the nature of what we are capable of thinking and imagining and of wondering about, why those things are part of us. What do they mean? What do they eventually help us see and become, in a sense, a larger part of? But those are all things that happen, I think, once you start the dialogue on the level we're talking about with children.
And the dialogue, I think, has to do with trust and just, it's something you said about, I think I'm forgetting what I was, you brought up something in my mind when you were speaking about how everything's invisible until we give it, until, how did you say it? Everything's invisible for the child.
Until it's
What's the end of the sentence?
Well, everything is invisible, so to speak, initially, until it becomes visible.
Okay.
And
so,
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So we are some kind of conduit, some kind of bridge. We are validating, our role is to validate that idea that is inside, or that imaginary friend, or that invention, or that poem, or that painting. And we as educators that we are, we're given the privilege of listening to that. And the question that we have to then ask ourselves is, how do we respond? And so again, with the clay, when a 2-year-old today over Zoom told me that, or said to her teacher and to me, it's a baby, and held up her ball of clay, it's a baby. The ball is in my court, how am I going to respond to this, and how am I going to validate that baby is real? Like she, and then she wanted to bring it over to me and show me. And then I asked her what song she was going to sing her baby. And then we started singing a little bit together. And I guess it's just, again, full circle. It's sort of like the idea is here, the material is here. The language might not be there. Maybe just one word is all she had, for that moment in her life at age 2, baby. But really hugely important word, right? And concept. And the idea that she was going to take care of the baby as she's been taken care of by her mom. And it's just the profound is really happens every single second.
Yeah.
And the invisible is made visible through these materials. I have to also reference again one of your workshops. And I wonder, this is really making me wonder, again, the word wonder, I'm using it as a verb. Wait a minute. How many parts? Wonder, it's not, okay. So I wonder how much of my work was made visible through having met you, Richard. This is so interesting, Renee. I don't know. Renee, do you know what year you started to go? Did you go to Richard's workshops?
I cannot remember when I first met Richard and when I first met you. You seem to have always somehow been in my life, but you haven't, of course.
Because I think I might have known Richard. It might have predated when I met you, Renee. I'm not sure, but I have 2002 on this particular folder. Okay, so it says, see, it's really true. I went to a workshop, winter, spring 2002, listenings in search of the poetic life of childhood. Can you see this? Beautiful. Okay. So, but inside here, I have an envelope of what I made, and it's called, can you read that? The thought of the
world and the dreaming seed.
Yeah. So was it dreaming what?
The thought of the world and the dreaming seed.
Oh, the dreaming seed, yes.
And so I open this up, and this is so classic, Richard. There's a string.
Beautiful.
Now we could just throw it to you and you could do the workshop right now. But what I'm just fascinated by this whole idea, because inside you had us draw something. Mm-hmm. So here's my dreaming seed. Mm-hmm. I called it the dreaming seed. So this is just this was somewhat lost in my home for maybe 18 years, but just the idea that it's not lost. Like it's in the dreaming seed is here.
Yes.
And another thing in that folder was this little, Richard, did you give us paper to write did you require us to take notes?
Not notes, but this is part of, as I remember, we always have little pads around, like,
Well, so what did I write on this pad in 2002? Just children's stories. Mm-hmm. It's just full of children's stories. It's all about fairies, the fairy house that flies and how you get it to fly. And wait, I'll read you that one. Hold on one moment. I'm going to read you this because this child who said this was in ARC, my piece that I wrote my thesis about for grad school, and just looking back at how children see themselves in a video that they are in. And this girl was in it. And I don't know what she's talking about here. She says, when the fairies are flying, they make it turn to magic. And then they live in a big hole that makes the house turn into magic. And when the house turns to magic, they turn it into a hole. And then it turns into a fairy house. But first it turns to a regular house. And then they flap their wings so hard, they can make it turn into a fairy house.
Mm-hmm. You know, Richard, I know how I first knew of you. Now I just remembered. I didn't meet you then, but it must have been at least then, in 2002, maybe before that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure it was before that, where a very good friend of mine, Connie Nogren, who is a phenomenal first grade teacher. Mm-hmm. And we co-taught together. I had a kindergarten, she had first grade, and we had a double room, and she gave me your book. Mm-hmm. She gave me one of your books. I can't remember which one it is now. And Connie is a poet, and she really particularly related to the poetry of your of your books. And so I remember then that when I finally did meet you, it took me a while to make the connection. Oh, this is the same Richard Lewis. And I remember I couldn't wait to come home and call Connie and say, I can't believe I have to tell you who I just spent time with. It was Richard Lewis. You're Richard Lewis, that's how I knew it. But Kristen, the other day you were talking about a way that you connected sort of the magic of their imagination with just what you showed us before, this paper dowel, with 2-year-olds, right?
Oh, yes. So when do you want me to share that?
Yeah, I think that would be so interesting because, this is something everybody has, it's not high tech, and it's a really nice way of.
And it's universal because Richard, I wasn't looking at your book when I decided to do this, but friends, you must catch your moment. We're all catching.
I have to get that book. Okay.
Catching our moment because it's all connected, and I seem to recall in my subconscious that I probably went to a touch tone workshop, and you had us make this out of maybe just rolling up paper. Yes. Perhaps. Is that possible?
It's absolutely possible.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's just deep within me, like it's been the seed, the dreaming seed. It's there, and it's there for all of us. So, and again, what with our practice in the studio at Beginnings, where the home of Teaching Beyond the Square is right upstairs from my studio, but now my studio is at home for the current season. But I still repurpose and recycle every single object, right? And I don't save every one of these. This one happens to have blue inside, so I save a few of these beautiful blue ones. So I'll show you what we did last April with 2-year-olds, and I'm just gonna try to share this.
You did it as a slide, I think.
There we go. So can you see this correctly now? All right, so again, there we are with just a piece of paper, not a toilet paper roll at all, just a piece of paper and one piece of tape. These are some Zoom shots of me, and then I'm just going to show you a quick little walkthrough of how the provocation evolved. So I did do this into the screen so that children could see me in a crazy different way. And then they started to experiment too, of course. And the teachers were there as well, experimenting. So here's the same child who has, with his adult caregiver, has made, has made it himself with the paper, and then using a larger already made roll. But then check it out, using a box and cutting off the end of the box and attaching it to a cardboard roll. Same here, the handmade and something that was larger in a square format, but that also had a hole to look through. And here you start to see the virtual background and the leaps start to be made, right? Because we're looking through a telescope, but Zoom is enabling us to feel like we're in outer space. And so things are starting to get even more interesting, right? And so as he was looking through the created telescope, his family, of course, wanted to share their real telescope. So out it came, and then a whole other conversation happened. And there he is in outer space with his telescope. And then we started to look through other kinds of things. And there I am looking through a glass that you drink out of. And then children and their, parents and caregivers and older siblings started to look through glasses as well, or anything that you could look through.
Wonderful.
And then we looked at our loved ones, our stuffies. We saw what you could see, how did that change, and talked about that. So many conversations about, and then of course our babies want to look through too, right? And then we all tried the same background, and then we're all in outer space. So fun. And I just really got into the whole idea of using Zoom as a medium, as a material. And so once you're thinking of that, and once you're into the virtual backgrounds, you're realizing that you can manipulate yourself, right? And so what happens when you cover up the camera when you have a virtual background on? So of course, the children want to try to disappear too. So then we're disappearing into outer space. And so just full circle back to one paper towel roll or toilet paper roll or piece of paper into the camera. I asked the children and the families, please send photos of this exploration, and look what happened. Here was one sister group in Zoom, and then look what they sent. These were from a camera taken after our session.
Wonderful.
So thank you for letting me share that.
Those are
That was
wonderful.
one of the highlights of the last year.
That's wonderful. I mean, you've kind of proven the point that that children will gravitate to anything that allows them to really picture the world through their imagination, that allows them to see the world as something that's not only what is outwardly seen, but inwardly prompted by what's going on within their own mind, within their own imagination. And the diversity, going back to diversity, the diversity of possible ways of doing that. Again, from a small piece of paper to all these different ways that you, theme and variations that you brought to it. So it's, again, another way of going back to our original thought about wonder, it seems to me. It's a way of evoking the wonder of our own imagining, the wonder of how we actually can see the world, not just with the physical sense of seeing it directly with the eyes, but seeing it with, if I can put it this way, with the inward eye. And the power of the inward eye to enlarge the world way beyond the physical sense of the world itself. It's kind of remarkable, but it's at the basis of science, it's the basis of arts, it's the basis of how we really begin to know things. How we take one piece of something and enlarge it to something else, and all those connective qualities that come not just by seeing something for the first time and then saying, oh, that's it, but allowing us to explore literally the theme and variations of everything that can be seen, particularly as when we bring the outer and the inner together. I don't know if it just made me think of something from the book you shared, that this is by a child named Manshan, and this is what he said. He said, this is from his, also seeing through his telescope, and this is what he said: I see the heart of love. I see clouds dancing in the road of you. I see much. I know I see things I could not see. Trees beautiful, trees nice, trees dancing down the way. I see a lot of nature when I play.
I love the road of you, in the road of you.
Yeah, but again, it goes back to this amazing capacity of the mind to open itself up to possibilities that even the child was not aware of until you gave him that little paper telescope to look even deeper and to give the permission. I mean, that's the other beautiful part.
Yeah, it's the permission and the validation.
It's
right?
okay. We can
This
look.
this could be real. What was it that you thought again? Oh, tell me more.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe too.
Yeah, and it's that beautiful way of saying what's reality, kind of that question mark. I mean, children have questioned us and said, Richard, this doesn't exist. And I said, did you see it? And of course, they said, yes, I saw it. Well, it must be real if you saw it. So anyway, it goes back to the nature of the imagination to be able to encompass not only what the eye sees, but the larger spectrum of what we see inwardly.
Right. I think I'm going to end on that note because I think it gets too much more beautiful than that. And this has just been, I have all kinds of things that I want to now look at and I want to listen to again because I couldn't write down the things that the two of you were saying quickly enough, But I want to thank you so much for enabling this, And,
oh, sure. Thank you, Renee.
Thank you, Renee.
And go play in the snow.
Yeah, you too. Yeah.
And be sure to take the snowflake that falls in your hand.
Yes.
Let it open up just like that.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Beautiful.
Take care.
Yes.